When I finally got back into clay at my local community studio back in 2017, I, much like everybody else, found myself spending every spare moment I could find sat down at the wheel. One weekend in particular, I was able to come in and stay for an entire afternoon. And while uninterrupted time with clay was a balm to my mind, my back had other thoughts about sitting on that wooden stool hunched over the wheel for such long, uninterrupted time. So, what does it mean to create a making practice that doesn't actually wreck our bodies in the process? Can we do it? How might we approach the physical demands of our craft with the same care and attention we give to developing our technical skills? What small adjustments might transform our studio practices from painful to sustainable? Today's conversation with Elizabeth Schlatter, creator of The Aligned Potter, explores all these questions and more. After rediscovering pottery and experiencing significant discomfort in the process, Elizabeth was struck by how little accessible information existed about caring for makers' bodies. When her instructor casually dismissed her back pain as simply potter's back, Elizabeth decided to create a free resource to help makers understand their bodies and find personalized solutions. We discuss everything from the simple practice of body awareness through something like a joint inventory to creative, do it yourself ergonomic solutions that don't require expensive equipment. Elizabeth shares insights on adapting your environment rather than forcing your body to adapt, the importance of movement variety, and why there's no one-size-fits-all approach to making comfortably. We'll get into Elizabeth's practical wisdom for creating a more sustainable, comfortable making practice right after this brief word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by The Community. With now over 100 makers from all over the world, The Community is where you can dive deeper into any topics we started talking about here on the podcast. Whether it's the debate back on episode 509 about choosing between Etsy or your own website, or trying to sort out what type of side hustle or full-time business works for your own personal life after hearing so many different stories here on the podcast. If you've been listening along and finding yourself wishing for more at the end of an episode, The Community is that more. Learn about more of the perks of membership by visiting makersplaybook.com/community. Or send me a message and I can put you in touch with one of our members to get an insider's perspective. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Hey, Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I feel like you have a more, nobody can actually see us, so I don't know why I'm going to say this, but you have a more prepared background than I ever have. And I was like, this is so great.
Yes. So this is a folding screen that I bought on Amazon during the pandemic when I was working from my basement. And because I don't like the blurred background, and I also didn't want my laundry and everything behind me. So I got this. It's a little tenuous, so unbalanced. So I have props behind it, but I kind of like it. I like the
It's
pattern.
perfect. Yeah, it looks great. I meant to say that earlier before we hit record, but hey, after a few years, I still don't know how to start these things. So, we just keep it exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. I have a friend who's got one. It's on the Microsoft program, and it looks like she's in a warehouse. And I'm like, just blink twice if you've been kidnapped, because I don't know where you are. It looks so nondescript.
That's hilarious. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. That's so much easier than like the perfectly arranged plants and the shelves that are,
Yeah.
in this. Anyways, I've been
Not
thinking
gonna
a lot about this lately and nobody actually cares.
Ta-da! No one cares.
This is why we do audio only podcasts, so I don't have to worry about this.
There you go.
Before I keep rambling about backgrounds for way too long, who are you? How would you introduce yourself in whatever
Sure.
context you want?
Yeah. So I'm Elizabeth Schlatter, and I'm talking to you today because I created this project called The Aligned Potter. I'm a longtime museum professional, a curator and deputy director and independent curator. So I have a lot of experience with arts administration and leadership within the fine arts field. But I did pottery as a hobby in my 20s, and then I stopped because that's not the easiest thing, or it wasn't at the time the easiest thing to do without access to a full studio. So I left my museum job in 2023 and didn't know what I was going to do. Took a class with my daughter at the nearby studio, and I fell in love again with pottery making. And I also found that it was a very like healing experience to work with clay, which I know there's studies that back that up too. Like anything you do with your hands, like gardening or whatever, is useful. So now I'm like throwing myself into pottery making again. Yeah, but my
Into
body hurts. It's a bit painful. So hence the Alive Potter.
Well, so
That's fun.
how did you start learning all like, just getting straight into the Align Potter? Because I think
Yeah,
anybody listening is gonna understand right away, like, yes, everything hurts. So,
right.
no need to explain that. I feel like everyone's
Mhm.
like, "Yes, oh my gosh, how do we make this better?"
Yeah, so I'll tell you how I started it. So I was taking this pottery class again. I hadn't taken it in forever. I did the first class, and then the next week I came back in and I was like, "Oh my gosh, my back really hurts." And so I said, it didn't hurt until I got to the sink to clear. I've been at the wheel like for 3 hours. I get to the sink and I'm like, "Oh my God."
I can't stand up straight.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I said to the instructor, like, "Hey, my back really hurts," thinking that I would and she's a great instructor, don't get me wrong. But I was like, "Hey, my back really hurts. Like, do you have any suggestions?" She was like, "Ah, Potter's back." And I'm like, "This Potter's been around for millennia. Like, why is this not discussed or solved?" So then I started looking stuff up and I found there is a lot online, but it's usually individual to the pottery maker. It's not how to think about your body and what you're doing to find out what you need and then adapt what's good for you. It was more like try this, try this, try this, which I still, think is valuable. But so then I was like, well, this is nuts. And also this should be free. Like you shouldn't have to pay for this. So that's when I started it. So now it's this website, it's the Instagram feed, it's the YouTube. And originally I thought, oh, it'll be easy. I'll raise money for it and I'll pay for videographers and potters to be in it. And that wasn't the case, which I'm doing it now. I know you're laughing. Thank you. But it's
I
also
was I was
it's
just talking about fundraising with Ben Carter, and we were like,
yeah,
"Yeah, people think that, like, no, mm-mm."
yeah. And I come from the arts, right? Like I
Yeah.
know better. But the other thing is it doesn't fit a lot of the criteria for
Mm,
funding. It's not an artist project. It's not a residency. It's not a scientific study. It's not art history. But every time I talk to somebody, especially if they have been a potter or they work with clay or really just artists in general, like, oh my God, I know, we really need something. So there's a lot of support. And even when I find funding for wellness for makers, usually it's for like mental wellness or just general self care, which is definitely important. Anyway, so, but I'm still doing it. And then there's a local videography group called Double Take. And it just so happened that it's two people. And one of them was in my ceramics class and we were all introducing ourselves. And I was like, hello.
it's amazing.
Yeah. So they've donated 2 videos, which has been awesome. And then I've been asking, what I want to do is go around to the local potteries and potters and feature them. I don't want to be in all the videos, frankly. And I also want people that are different body shapes too, because some people are 6'8" and some people are 4'9". And I'd like to have more representation as I continue in terms of again, it's not like your elbow should always be like this. It's kind of like think about where your elbow is and think about what you can do. Yeah.
I'm imagining also that it can be environmental in terms of like, okay, sure, you can think about where things are, but then if I'm
Mhm.
also thinking about centering and I'm also thinking about the speed of the wheel and the amount of water and the this and the that, like for me, it's so easy to completely forget where my body is and then 20 minutes later be like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
forgot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so like little cues or things that you can I mean, for me, I just switched to standing.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah. I love standing to throw. But as soon as you change one thing, that comes with its own set of issues because then it's like, okay, well, standing is better than sitting for me. But then at the same
Mhm.
time, if I have my foot on the pedal, now my weight isn't distributed evenly. So are my
Right,
hips going to hurt
yeah.
more? So then what do I need for that? Like it's kind of this constant. There was a metaphor I was looking for, but apparently no words are coming to me today. But, once you fix one thing, the next thing shows up that, okay, now
Right.
I have to adjust for this. And the
Yeah.
variable just keeps changing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a standing wheel is not comfortable, and I've tried different things, and I have lower back pain, but yeah, I mean, I've just made, and I'll be editing soon, so it'll be up by the time this airs, a video about how the most important thing you can do for your body is just to think about your body. And so Because it can be super overwhelming, right? Like, just like you said, like, I'm trying to figure out how to center and this clay keeps slumping down on itself or whatever, or I'm trying to, I got to finish this pinch pot before my paid hours end at 4 o'clock or whatever. Yeah. So this video is going to talk about, and it's just me talking about how it can be overwhelming. So I'm going to suggest that people do like a joints inventory. So you really just think about what's going on with my joints and you do it in between the segments of making. So you don't need to worry about while you're centering. But when you finish whatever it is you made, then if you can, after you take the piece off the wheel or after you finish the pinch pot and you're going to put a coil on, before you put that coil on, that's the in-between segment of making. And that's when you can be like, okay, what's my joint inventory? And then you can be like, okay, my head is way forward, or, my hips actually are tilted because of, yeah, there's like too much going on, right? There's a conversation going on in the studio and you're also learning from an instructor. So it's really, don't stop what you're doing. Just pay attention if you can and think about your joints so you don't have to think about everything. And if that's too much, just think about where is a part of your body you want to focus on, or is there a part of your body that's bugging you? Like if your wrists are bugging you, if your lower back, for me, it's my lower back and my head. I'll make something. And I always now, a lot of potters talk about being a little bit more inefficient in the pottery so that
Mhm.
it makes you move around more. As soon as I make a pot, I stand up and I stretch and do something. But I've trained myself to do that. It's a whole different way of thinking. And it can be hard too, just to know, like, how do I know if my chin's out? So just kind of playing around with it. Oftentimes my jaw will be completely clenched because I'm like, I'm going to center this clay. And plus, I am not perfect at any of this. I'm still learning. But I do stop during those segments. Even like, you dunk the piece in the glaze, you come back and you sit and you're like, okay, how am I sitting on this chair?
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to suggest. Because, yeah, it's a lot.
I'm glad that you mentioned the inefficiency piece because that's the thing I hear a lot is like, okay, for the production potters who can sit there and throw for, hours on end, it's kind of like, yes, the efficient thing to do is to have it set up where you can just move a wear board to the side without getting up from your spot so that you can keep going. But forcing yourself to have to get up and move and take that wear board somewhere else and then come back at least just moves your body in a different
Right.
way. So kind of intentionally setting yourself up to have to move.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, it's hard too. If I pay for hours at a community studio, I don't want to be inefficient. So
Yep.
I don't want to be doing that. But so there are things I can do. Like I recently took this pinch pot class and learned how much it can hurt to pinch pots. So I'm going to be studying that next. But one of the things, in order to give them time to dry, is like pinch one pot up to a certain point, then pinch another pot at a certain point, and then another pot. And I thought, well, that's really efficient, but it's really killing my fingers.
Mm.
So I'm going to pinch and then I'll stop and I'll roll out a coil. So there's lots of ways of being inefficient, quote unquote, inefficient without having to get up and move. And definitely you want to be inefficient without having to wash your hands. Like no one wants to add that into the mix, right? Because that's like a whole nother thing.
This is the Potter specific part of body mechanics.
Right.
Is like, yes, let's be efficient with how frequently we have to clean.
Yeah. I know, right? And when I was doing that pitch potting workshop, which was wonderful, I would just stop. I got a roller and I would like just roll my hands over the roller on the table for,
Mhm.
a couple, like maybe up to 30 seconds. If you're like me, you love productivity. And so I hate saying inefficient, even though it does kind of make sense. Because I'm like, no, I have 2 hours I've paid for. I have to get this, or I want to get this done within the 2 hours. But how can I also think about caring for myself within those 2 hours and still feel like I've accomplished what I wanted?
Maybe it's a matter of the way you just phrased that made my brain like, I don't know, an aha moment. Because maybe it's a matter for those of us like yourself and myself that are
Yeah.
obsessed with productivity. You're not being inefficient with your time, Like
Yeah.
you're still, it's not like you're saying, okay, I'm going to pinch one pot and then I'm going to sit here and stare at it for 10 minutes so that my hands can recover. You're pinching one pot. You need to let that dry to firm up a little bit anyway. So instead of opening your phone and scrolling on your phone, which frankly is not great for your that kind of chubby part
Yeah.
under your thumb and your
Oh,
wrist,
yeah.
like that's going to hurt your hands
Well,
anyways.
it's not good for your neck, for sure.
And your
Yeah.
neck. So then it's kind of like, okay, so I'm going to use my time differently. It's still efficient because you need that coil. And the
Yeah.
coil also kind of has to be the right consistency, right?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that.
Yeah. Or maybe you use the time to roll a bead, or maybe you already have the rolling pin out. Whatever. You can use anything around you. Honestly, with your hands, I feel like there's so much possibility. I will give a quick tip real quick, I can tell myself. So
Totally.
one thing I've learned is that you don't wanna use one hand to massage the other hand because it just tires out your hands even further. So it's helpful to
Mm.
grab something, and again, it can be like a rolling pin, it can be a ball, it can be just like a pen, whatever it is, and just roll it between your hands, and that can just give you a little bit of relief and kinda help move that I can't remember the name of the fluid, but it helps with your fascia and the fluid in your fascia. I sound like I
Mhm.
know things. And honestly, it could just be for, a minute and or less than a minute, and then you get to start doing something else, but you don't have to stand up, and so you can do something like that, or you can do this kind of joints inventory too. I always check my head and my neck. My head is always forward, and so I'm like,
Oh,
let me try to make that double chin and set that up.
everything I do, my neck is forward. I'm just like in however many thousands of years or millennia that evolution takes, like I feel like humans are just going to actually have a
Mhm.
completely different spine structure because
Yeah.
I keep trying to even recognize just sitting at a desk, like how far forward I put the keyboard. Like why do I
Mhm.
keep pushing it forward and then everything comes forward like you're talking about the head and the neck and it's like, wait, this could be closer to me. I don't actually have to lean into the computer
Yeah.
screen.
Well, so you're doing like a joints inventory. You're like,
Mhm.
"Oh yeah, my neck, my fingers, and my elbows." So that's all you have to do is just think about it and be like, "Well, maybe let me just try this back here," because it might not be comfortable to do it in a different way, and it just takes a while. I've been practicing for months with this head thing, and I'm still practicing, but that's okay. Like that's the point. Just keep practicing, and it does improve my neck strain, even if I don't do it the entire time I'm working on pottery. By the end of the, few hours, I don't feel as strained because I've pushed my head back. So I don't know if I'll ever get it right, like quote unquote right. There is no right. This is just how my body is. I just posted a short video about how I got these magnifiers, these clip-on magnifiers, like 6 to a pack. And I was like, oh my God, game changer. Now I don't need to like lean over so far when I'm doing
Oh.
detail work. You can clip them on your I have reading glasses, so I clip them on my reading glasses, and now I'm seeing something at the power of 5.5 instead of 2 point so there are little things like that, or, raising your I don't wanna give out it's kinda tedious to hear a whole bunch of tips, but there can be super little things you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was just thinking was like even especially for people in a community studio who can't necessarily, you're not going to bring in your own stool every time you go to the studio so that you have the
Yeah.
perfect height or the perfect angle or, I've been in a variety of community studios where some of them have the shimpo stools that you can lower the front legs and have the back legs higher so
Mhm.
you're at an angle. Other ones are just wooden stools or dinner chairs or, whatever they could find and so the variety of that experience, I'm not bringing, and then to go the other extreme, a mentor of mine in Australia, Sandy Lockwood, she got these like purpose built. The only time I've been able to sit to throw for days is in her
Mm.
studio because she got these purpose built cushioned stools, but they were bigger and they were angled at a specific, I mean, it made the world of difference. But if I'm in
Wow.
a community studio, I'm not like hauling that thing
Yeah.
with me back and forth, that's really awkward. And so I started thinking about as you're talking, like, okay, if you're in a community space, you could even maybe you can't do a lot at the wheel, but if you're working at a table, either hand building or glazing or something, what can you do to bring that pot up to your eye level so you're not looking down or
Yeah. When I was doing the pinch potting workshop, this is kind of the opposite of that, but I was having a lot of pain working with it so close to my head. So I actually put it on the table and stood up, and then that meant my everything in my arm was aligned, and that was much better.
Mm,
But that reminds me of two things. I want to talk about this grant I got from Source Plus, and there was something else. Oh yeah. So when I first started the Align Potter, I talked with one of my previous physical therapists because at my age, we all have physical therapists from various things. She really helped instill in me this idea that there's no one right way to have posture. There's no one right way to stand. There's no one right way to position your body, which was so helpful to hear. And her whole ethos is, I'm going to help my patients get all, I don't want to misspeak for her, but get all the strength and mobility they need for movements that they want to do with the body that they have. And I was like, that's perfect. Because the last thing I want is for anyone to feel an obligation out of this. Like, oh, I'm not doing this right, or I should be doing this more. It's not like that at all. It's really, figuring out what works for you and what's going to help you keep making whatever is going on. Like if you have a frozen shoulder, whatever that is. Yeah. That was one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other thing, I did get a grant from Surf Plus one of their Get Ready grants, which is amazing. It's $1,000 and it's to, prepare makers to help their, practice. And so I got the funding to buy a small wheel, and then I'm going to buy an adjustable table and an adjustable seat of some sort. So maybe I'll talk to you about that also. And I don't know what it is I'm going to buy, although I'm working with a local clay store. I think I know the wheel. But anyway, the idea is that then I can use those not just for myself to try to play, like maybe I can use a standing desk. I mean, a standing wheel. I just haven't got the right setup. And then also make videos of that, either of me or of other people using this equipment. Because I do think, there's the Artista wheel by Speedball, and Quark has a wheel now too. They're small, but I feel like they can really help with accessibility depending on, what's going on with your body and how you can get yourself to the wheel, whatever that means.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of standing was originally introduced to me at the Chicago community studio that I used to go to, Lincoln Square. But because it's a communal space, it's not like I can modify something just for myself. So what would happen was every time I came in, somebody would help me lift the wheel up onto this kind of center area that we had, where everybody else typically like put their wear boards, because it was basically the middle section in between where the wheels were, like the wheels faced each other. So that was just a prefixed height. So it wasn't like it was specific to my body, but it was still close enough that it was exponentially better for me than sitting.
Yeah.
But that also was freestanding, right? Like there wasn't anything
Right.
behind my back. There wasn't anything like that.
Right.
And so I was still using a lot of core strength. I also was 20 pounds lighter at the time. And going to Pilates like 3 or 4 times a day. So I had all those like little stabilizers or muscles. I could do all of that. But then bodies change, bodies shift, And so when I managed to borrow a wheel during COVID just to be able to practice, I couldn't fire anything, but I just got something and I knew I wasn't going to be able to sit for that long. So my dad just got wooden dowels from the hardware store, because a lot of the companies sell the legs, but it's a few $100s. When all you need, we just got dowels that fit into the hollow part of the legs of the wheel that already existed and, kind of took a measurement, figured out where they needed to be, and then up it went because I was just borrowing that wheel, which was a really cheap solution instead of spending a few $100s on the manufactured ones. But then kind of adding on to that, as soon as Francesco and I met, then it was like, oh, actually, if you're going to stand, you should have something behind you. The whole point is to have support. And I had never even done that. And so then that kind of changed it. So I feel like all of this rambling to say it's also an evolution of like what's maybe 1 or 2% better than how it felt prior. And then you learn from that, okay, this was better than what it was before, but maybe we can, then maybe the next time you can adjust something, or you go from one studio to the next, or the environment changes, things like that. It ebbs and flows with what our body, our bodies change too. So I'm a big fan of like non-totally permanent solutions. Like one more example for desks, even the first studio I ever had for photography, I like IKEA hacked a standing desk. I bought stuff and made it a standing desk, but that was permanent. So I always had to stand. And if I was editing for 8 hours a day, eventually you're going to get tired. You're going to start leaning over. You're going to hunch. And so then when I had the cash to do it, then I bought an electric desk so I can go from sitting to standing and sitting and standing, because different days you're going to need different things, different times of day.
Did you get a mat for your feet?
At the desk or in the studio? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry if I seemed like I wasn't paying attention. I wanted to grab something so I could write some notes. So a couple ideas. One, so a lot of people credit John Glick, who is a potter who came up with an article, I think it's Studio Potter, about sciatica.
From sciatica to
Yeah. And he, I don't know, like throughout the pottery throughout history, I don't know if he's the first person to invent the pottery wheel, but he definitely published in English about it. So when I mentioned the line potter, a lot of people mentioned that article and his work. And he did recommend a cushion behind his back, because he had that back injury. So I've seen people do that as well, where you're kind of backed up against a wall. It's a very jerry-rigged setup, the way he does it. I don't know if there's something professional out there for that. But I was also going to mention, there's a potter at the studio that I go to who does use a standing wheel, but she puts herself in a running stance. So it's almost like a lunge on her side. And that's how she throws. And that's what's best for her back. So everybody's different. My back really hurt when I just tried trimming on a standing wheel, but it was like free floating like yours.
That's the funny thing. I could stand to throw, but I had to sit to trim.
Oh, that's funny.
Which
Yeah.
was actually
Huh.
really helpful because then
Yeah.
I would still move. Now, again, I could do that because I was at a community studio, so I could switch reels or move it down after I was done throwing and things like that. But I did the same thing because since the wheel was up on a platform, I put the pedal on the platform. So then my right leg was up. I looked like a Captain Morgan ad or something. Like my right leg was up.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I see what you're saying. That's smart.
But what was nice was when I was putting pressure into the clay, I was moving with my whole torso, like I was hinging instead of kind of crouching over. So
Right. Oh, well, that's great.
that's what worked for me.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say is one thing that's been frustrating, although I learned it's not just my inability to research, but there's no peer-reviewed paper that I can find about statistics for injuries, not for pottery makers, at least in the United States, and or for artists really. I have this statistic from the 2023 U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook states that artists and related workers have one of the highest rates of injuries and illnesses of all occupations. But I haven't been able to find the data for that. That's just from 2023, so it's pretty recent. But I haven't been able to source where they got that data. And it's possible they're including performing artists in there as well. And I think there have been more studies for performing artists. I know musicians, there's been a lot of studies, which kind of makes sense too, because a lot of it is just this repetitive stress injury we're having because we keep putting ourselves in these positions.
If they include dancers in there, then
Yeah, right.
if performing arts is in there and dancers, then the data is real skewed.
Right. But I don't know. I don't know. So I need to look into that some more. But I haven't found any published studies, except there's one study that was done in Indonesia about tradespeople who did crafts. And the biggest factor in injuries was age. Anyone over 33 tended to report, I know, which is kind of old.
Nobody saw
But
my eyeballs, but I was like, 33 is not.
it's not, but that was when, the numbers of incidents and reporting of incidents with musculoskeletal issues started rising. And I think we all know a lot of potters over the age of 33, right?
I
And
was
then
gonna
the
say we're
other
only
said,
barely starting to maybe get good if
I
you
know.
started in your 20s.
Right. I know. And I'm assuming those tradespeople are almost like production potters. Like they're probably producing all day with similar things. And then there are some studies for factory ceramic work, especially in Brazil. There have been some studies, and that's very rigorous, that kind of factory ceramic. But again, it's not on an individual artistic basis. And so I know a lot of the reason is, I don't know all the reasons, that's not my area of expertise, but I know some of the reasons are people don't report it as an injury. Nobody's gathering these statistics. So I am doing a session at the 2025 College Art Association conference, which is in New York in February. And the bigger conversation is how can we help generate these studies? Because once we have the studies, then there'll be resources put into it, I think. Because I know in some of the grants that I've applied to, it's been hard, even though anecdotally we all know that there's a lot happening to the potter's body. If there isn't a study, it's hard to prove the need if to the person who's not a pottery maker. And that's, I don't even know the right language for what kind of study this is. I'm still learning myself in terms of vocabulary to put kind of study like this together. But I'm hoping to gather a lot of interest for, like, it would be amazing if a university that had like a physical therapy or occupational therapy department or any kind of organization like that might look into doing a statistical study and then have a peer-reviewed article come out.
A university makes a lot of sense for that. Also, if there's a ceramics program there, because think about the number of students going through some.
I'll say yes and no, because a lot of those students are under the age of 33.
Fair enough.
So yes, you have the warm bodies, but what we want is more of a longitudinal study to look at like the career and the effects on the career.
And also, does your body hurt because you're hungover or?
Right.
Yeah, it's slightly different demographic.
But, in theory, and I don't know, I mean, it would be wonderful too if there are some studies done in terms of abilities and disabilities and pottery making. I'm just focused right now on this though. But I was going to say, when I did ceramics in the early 90s, when I was in my 20s, nobody do the math, it's all good. I remember I was a studio assistant. I went to the Glassell School, which is the fine arts school for the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And I worked with this really great potter. And so since then, I feel like there's been a huge amount of research and information put out about toxicity and care within the studio, chemicals, and the results of not storing or ventilation. I feel like there's been huge changes just in those couple of decades. but I haven't seen a change in the care of the body. So that's what I'm hoping to is that this aligned Potter is not going to be the little engine that could, but hopefully it'll generate a bigger discussion for people who can be part of the change to then make body awareness just part of the education.
I don't know. I think the name's memorable enough. It could
Oh,
be the thing.
yay.
Why not? Somebody's gotta do it.
That's right. That's me sitting here in Richmond, Virginia.
I wonder how I don't know how different this is country to country, but, like, my first
Right.
experience when I did the residency in Italy, the very first day, the first week, our instructors were observing everyone saying, "Okay, hold on, we need to adjust the height of this stool," or
Oh, nice.
I mean, I had requested, "Can we raise the wheel? Because I'm gonna need to stand," because I was like, "How am I gonna throw for 3 months in a row?" I've never been in a studio for that long. I got really worried, and they worked with me on that,
Oh,
which wasn't a
awesome.
problem, but, like, from the beginning, it was about ergonomics. There's a type of wheel that Francesco is trying to, like, DIY create in our own studio
Oh,
that's popular in Europe that is oh, shoot, I just forgot what he calls it. But essentially the wheel head is to the side, and you're actually kind of half sitting and
oh,
half like, it is built to be ergonomic, and so
oh,
you're
that's so cool.
you're not completely sitting down and you're not completely standing, you're kind of
Wow.
perched, but then it means instead of, like, leaning over like we all do to see the side of the
Yeah.
pot, you're already there, and the ergonomics for your arm to just come straight up and down, like when you're pulling.
That is so interesting. Ooh, I wanna see that.
I'll get you some pictures if I can find it, but you can't find it in the US, that type of
I've
wheel.
n
It's his thing he missed the most, I think, aside from,
Ah.
fresh Buffalo mozzarella.
It sounds like that's a good birthday gift for you to get him. Just I mean, no big
Oh,
deal.
yeah, I mean, sure, next time I'm looking for a 4 to 5 figure birthday gift, no problem.
Yeah. Well, so that
Um,
reminds me of 2 things, which is that when I first got this started, I met with a potter, Jeff Dick, at the studio where I work, and he was like, "Elizabeth, this knowledge is out there. It's just like person to person," which was another impetus behind the Align Potter, which is that that's not the most efficient way to I mean, it's a great way to communicate information, but it's not the most efficient way, and also sometimes that means you need to have the funding to get that information. So it'd be great to offer like you got it at a residency, right? So or I'm getting it potentially in a class. And that's all great, but I also want to do what I can to make it free and online. So it's easy to get and you can find a lot of free solutions.
It sounds like, the problem that is so prevalent in the arts in general in terms of access to resources. Like, yeah, that's great if it's person to person, but if you don't know the
Yeah.
person, how are you supposed to do anything about it? Yeah. There's just so many levels of this, I also feel, because, I didn't even think about the pain in your hands to be pinching. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about much bigger muscle groups in terms of my back and my hips, and it just goes to your point from the very beginning that I wanted to circle back to, and how personal it is. And what I like about what you're suggesting is also it's more like asking questions and discovery rather than, "Oh, there's this product or there's this,
Yeah.
yoga for potters," or different things, and obviously stretching and actual physical movement is important and a piece of it as well, but, like,
Hmm.
there's so many ways that we can get marketed to, I guess, in terms of, like, buy this thing to help this, instead
Yeah.
of like, well, hold on, let's kind of dissect what's going on first before we go all the way to picking up the credit card.
I mean, which is hard because I know a lot of us potters have a tool addiction issue.
Yes,
So if I can buy a tool to solve this problem,
right?
but yeah, so on the website for Line Potter for now, I've got it so you can look it up by body part that's discussed or by this is in the post and resource section. You can look up by body part or you can look up by process. So, anything about wheel throwing will be tagged, but anything about fingers will also be tagged. So you can kind of come at it from different directions because I know there are probably people who are going to look at absolutely everything, but just in case you've got a pain and you want to kind of check it out. And I haven't I'll be doing a little bit more hand building too. I haven't done a lot of that as much, but that's coming. And the other thing I was going to say, just FYI, I'm finishing up training in becoming a personal trainer, and I'm doing an online certification for that, just to kind of bone up, pun intended, my knowledge of that was terrible. The muscular skeletal system, which has been really useful because again, with personal training, a lot of not all of it, but a lot of it is about that kind of form and, making sure you're exercising, whether it's weights or cardio in a manner that's good for your body. So that's been really useful. And I thought about it again too, just this body awareness. I was at the gym. I'm taking this weights class at the Y, and we were doing like a tricep pullback. And a lot of us were starting up here with our arms, next to our clavicle, or hands next to our clavicle. And some of us had our arms. Anyway, she was like, okay, here's where you can position your arm to be at 90 degrees at your ribs. And I was like, oh, yeah. How do you know if someone doesn't tell you? Like, I'm not noticing that what I'm doing isn't the same as what you're doing without some help.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, not to minimize the benefit that a lot of tools can be. I know
Yeah, for sure.
I think you've gotten into the conversation with Connie in the community who got a strong arm and helped a lot of other people kind of discover the strong arm for
Yeah.
carpal tunnel and wrist strength and all of this. But, so there are very valid reasons. I mean, for me, even I have to have a wider pen, right? If I were to start doing a lot of carving stuff, I would need something that would have a wider grip than something skinny. For example, I got back into crocheting recently and I was going to use, instead of buying brand new crochet needles for like different sizes, I was like, oh, my mom used to do this. I'll just get hers. Well, she has the traditional ones that are just literally a stick of metal. And I'm like, I can't hold this, and now they have ergonomic needles that have like grippy and, I can actually hold it. So there is absolute validity to tools, but I also know I tend to buy something thinking it's gonna fix the thing when it's gonna help, but what I do also need to still do is increase my wrist strength. I need to take action on actually, protecting that long term instead of
Yeah.
relying on the tool.
Yeah. It's 2 ways, right? So it's the build up your wrist strength, but also try to look at what is your wrist doing when you're doing the thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is your wrist at an angle or is it, aligned? The other thing I was going to say is yes, I do think a lot of pottery tool companies are very aware of accessibility and, taking care of the body too. Med Tools donated some tools to the Line Potter, and they are thinking a lot about how what they already make helps with accessibility and what they're putting out in the future. And Gift and Grip contributed as well. And I know other companies are doing it too. So it's definitely a conversation that they're having, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I love tools. I just want to make sure there's some free things available too. And I will say, honestly, one of the best tips I got from a potter when I was talking about this, she was like, don't work with hard clay. And I'm
Also,
like, seriously, that is true. And because I would work with hard clay. I'm like, I've got 2 hours and I'm going to turn this ball of concrete into something. But now I think about that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this to my hands today. I'm not going to force them to turn this. Like, that's such a simple thing, but
which is tricky though, right? Because I know, like, I prefer to work with slightly softer clay than Francesco, but that's also because it's harder on my wrists. But on the flip side, he's intentionally throwing with slightly firmer clay because he can make a 24-ounce mug out of less than 500 grams of clay because it'll stand
wow.
up, right?
Right, right.
If he
Yeah.
threw that with anything softer, it would have to be thicker. And then if it's thicker and you want it thinner, then you have to trim it longer. You get into all of these, like, the amazing thing about ceramics specifically for me is how interconnected every single decision is.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, well, if I work with softer clay, it's better for my wrists, but then I have to trim it for
Mhm.
longer because I can't throw it as thin. So then I'm leaning, I've got my neck down while I'm trimming
Right.
longer. So then,
Well, okay, let's just make that more positive. So the other way you can think about that is that there's no limit on things you can adapt, right? You can adapt your materials, you can adapt your tools, you can adapt your body, you can adapt the time. Maybe you work on something more, less, maybe you work in the morning, whatever. All of it depends on what's good for you in your practice. But there really is no limit as to things you could try. Again, I know if you're a production potter, you may not have that flexibility, or if you're, an apprentice or something, but at least in your own practice, try different things. Because yeah, it's now that you mention it, it's kind of endless, all the things you could adapt just to see.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that it's just between the two of us in one household, both trying to do the same craft, he'll come in and see me doing something and be like, keep your back straight, keep your back straight. And I'm like, okay, look, mister, your core strength and my core strength are a lot different.
Oh my gosh.
You have lines on your stomach, I don't.
Oh
So
my gosh. Well, first of all, that needs to be posted, the lines on your husband's stomach. And second of all, that would be horrible for my marriage. Like, that would never work. That would drive me crazy. Like, I sometimes he's gonna kill me, but sometimes I'll share some things that I've learned in my anyway, we won't talk about that. It's all fine. We'll get in the podcast.
I mean, I might be going to throw out a community studio sometime soon.
There you go.
Keep the peace. Keep the peace.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is one of those things without somebody to gently point out
Mhm.
to you, like, hey, did you know you were just doing that? Like,
Yeah.
try this, it might feel better. Can be really hard to figure out.
It can be, yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd be in like an exercise studio with mirrors all around. And so if you don't have somebody helping you, you could at least look in the mirror. You can film yourself on your phone. Just set it up somehow and just take a look. No one will ever see it. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's not like you're going to keep it for posterity. But if you're curious about where your body is positioned, proprioception, where your body is positioned when you're doing an activity, just film yourself, lean your phone up against a book and record and see. And don't worry about it because honestly, if you're in a community studio and someone's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" and you can tell them once you start talking about injuries from pottery, like the conversation never stops. Like they all have things to share. So there's no reason to be awkward about it. Just be like, "I'm trying to see where my head is when I throw because I've got this pain and whatever." Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone can share stories.
totally. That does make me think I wanted to circle back because at the very beginning, we were talking about a joint inventory, and I wanted you to actually define, like, what is that for people?
Yeah.
Because I think I just made an assumption of what it is and didn't actually ask
I
it
don't
really.
know if it's actually a thing. I just made it up, but it could be a real thing. I haven't researched it. But for me, it's useful. So it comes from when I'm learning about in personal training, which is that, thinking about the center of gravity and the line of gravity. And the joints are where things move and then change where your center of gravity and your line of gravity are. And they change how gravity is affecting your head. So if I'm aware of where my joints are, that's also what one of the things we have control over, right? Like we don't have control over the length of our forearm, but we do have control over the placement. So thinking about where the joints are at that moment and if they feel good where they are, or if they don't feel good, or if you notice something like if I'm throwing, but I'm exaggerating, my arm is like totally bent one way, I know that that's not a good way for force to come through my hand. So I'm going to strengthen my wrist so that my wrist is in alignment with my forearm. Or I might notice I'm really grasping this trimming tool too hard. And too hard is that's relative, right? But that's for me, it's too hard. It's because I'm thinking of something else or I'm just frustrated. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna loosen up the joints in my hand while I do this. It's everything too. It's also like for some reason when I tend to wrap my feet around the stool, right? Like, and I don't know why I'm doing it right now. I don't know
I
why
just
I do that,
I
but that
just
is
heard
not,
because I sit
it's
cross-legged all the time, and I'm like, "This is literally
right.
the worst thing."
Yeah, it's okay. So here's the thing. It's not the worst thing. It's just what you do, right? It's totally fine.
For 6 hours, it's
Well, if you notice discomfort, right, then think about it. So that's what I mean by joints. For me, it's like, what are my knees and my ankles doing? Why is my entire leg wrapped around this one leg of the stool? Maybe this isn't helpful. So when I throw, I do, a lot of people will put a brick under the leg that isn't on the pedal. And that helps me not just to even out my hips, but also it keeps my foot in one place. Because if it's not
Mhm.
there without my control, my foot is moving around my other foot. I don't know why. And I'm not the kind of person that can just set it and forget it in terms of the pedal. I like to play with it while I'm throwing. So that's what I mean by a joints inventory. You can start at the top and go all the way down, or just pay attention to one or two places that are problems. Like for me, I know my lower back is an issue. So I check to see if I have a little curve in my back, not a major curve, but just a little curve. And then again, that, sticking my jaw back in, my chin back in. I don't always pay attention to clenching my jaw, but I want to because I do have TMJ. And that's more of a subtle thing. But so any of the joints, like you don't need to pay attention to your nose, right? Like you don't need or your hair, like all these other things, just pay attention. And it's also an easier way to kind of limit everything. So maybe you don't have to worry like, am I in the right position? Just be
Mhm.
like, what's going on with my shoulders? Maybe they're completely pushed in. Maybe I can pull them up and back. I always do that after I throw something because they'll end up way up here under my earlobes. So that's a good thing to check in with.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I should have planned for this to be on a video because if people could see us, every time you mention something, I'm moving my body.
Oh, I know.
You're right. I am over here. And all we're doing is sitting and talking, and it's already, it's
Hey,
just
I'm sitting on one foot right now. But to see, that's the thing. Like you want to move, right? You want your body to be strong enough to move, and you want to be able to have the balance and the stability to do whatever you want with your body and not encourage harm. And there's this phrase, your body is your most valuable tool, which is kind of cheesy, but it is true. If you lose your diamond core trimmer, you'll save up and order another one, and it'll just take a few weeks, but it will take a lot longer, right? If you ignore your herniated disc. So it is true to, like, just as you keep track of your tools, you want to keep track of your body and see what's going on. But yeah, but you want to move. You don't want to just be static. You just want to try to keep it fluid as best you can.
I wonder if this is one of those things where we get stuck in the quote unquote perfect solution instead of just trying something. I mean, and I'm gonna preface with, like, obviously somebody who has a home studio has more ability to try other things. I do think there's a lot of, I'm assuming, and I can think up a number of temporary things someone in a community studio can, you can get a stack of bats to raise something up while you're in the studio and then put them away for the next community member. But for your home studios, I can envision people being like, okay, well, I need to save up to get this particular table because it's at this height so that I have a wedging table at a better height for me. When in reality, you could also just, like, I don't know, go to the hardware store and buy a few bricks and test it out at first to see which height works well for you.
So two things. One, there's no posture police. Like, no, you're not going to get in trouble for not having good posture. You might have a little discomfort. So don't worry about it.
Chiropractor's gonna love you.
That's right. You're just helping the economy, the flow of funding. If you need to go to the doctor, don't worry about it. So the other thing, to your point, and I know this isn't a great suggestion, but I would, like, honestly put the question, how can I adapt my table at home with low cost materials into something like Chat GPT? And that will come up with some solutions to you, because I've seen, there's a potter who you can buy like a really cheap lift. I can't remember what it's called, but it's just, a really cheap, it's not a hydraulic lift, but it's a little something.
Like almost what you'd use if you have a flat tire.
Yeah, exactly. But like super cheap and small. And he put it on his banding wheel so that what he was working on was closer. So that's not a whole new table. That's a little thing you stick on, a lazy Susan if you have one, and voila. It can be very hard to adapt your home studio if you have a very prescribed space that you can work in or a budget. But there can be potentially creative solutions around it that don't break the bank. Yeah, bricks or magazines or whatever, just something to, like, lift up. Ideally you do want to have something close to your face that you're working on, but that's just not how all the pottery processes are.
Well, and depending, if you do then buy what you feel like is quote unquote the perfect solution, and then 3 months later, all of a sudden you're making much taller pieces, wider pieces. Some of the kind of clunky DIY stuff is great because you can adjust it depending on how you're feeling that day or what size the piece is.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe you hurt yourself at the Y. And so now you need something else.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically speaking, anything could happen. Yep.
Totally.
Did you ever see that Seinfeld where there was the library police? Like, I can't remember somebody, like, they had their book out. It might have been Seinfeld. It was like 20 years or something. Or maybe it was, I can't remember who it was. But yeah, that was funny. I always think about that.
I know earlier you said you didn't want to give a bunch of tips, but if there was like a kind of top, I don't know, top 5, top 3, you pick are there a few things that you feel like just to help people get started?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the first tip would be this idea of really building up your skill and body awareness. So that's that proprioception idea, but I'll practice how to say that appropriately. But, just doing what you can to start to learn about where your body parts are while you're making, and try it you can do the joints inventory or not, but try thinking about your body when you're in between these segments of making, these tiny little windows of time before you start another part of your process. It could be, I just applied my underglaze on this one thing and now I'm going to start another thing. Just, give yourself that little moment in time to think about where's your body located. And then once you start doing that, and then you start noticing a connection between where your body, and you may not, but sometimes that's when you notice a connection between what's going on in your hands or whatever. It can be tricky though, because everything's connected. So it could be that ankle that's wrapped around the leg of my stool is what's causing my shoulder pain. So don't worry about trying to figure it all out. But that joint inventory is helpful in the sense of, are your joints twisted? Are they overextended? If you have control over that, can you try to get them a little bit better aligned so that they seem more stable is useful. Because it is hard to make that connection between, my TMJ causes my ankle to hurt. Like you just never know what the
It's
sometimes it's a
always
one-to-one relationship.
it's also always on the opposite side of the body, right? It's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, the
yeah,
fact that I was leaning to the left is why the right side of my neck hurts." Like, "What? Why?"
yeah, yeah. We're just talking about pottery making. Like, there's so many things you could do in the rest of your time on this earth to help your body too. Like, so just exercising. I am a big fan of working with the fascia, which is that connective tissue that runs throughout your body in different parts. There is fluid within the fascia, and that can get tight. I don't know all the scientific information about it, but I did a couple posts about it on the Align Potter. And that's so easy to work on because it doesn't hurt. It doesn't have to hurt. That's the, roll a ball between your hands work. That's the use a foam roller.
I was gonna say, but anybody who's ever been on a foam roller before
Right.
might beg to differ.
That's true, but you don't have to make it hurt. If you're starting and just putting your leg on the foam roller hurts, that's step one, right? Like just but it's not like lifting weights. You're not going to break a sweat. You don't have to run a marathon. And again, it's that kind of thinking holistically about your body where, the connective tissue runs throughout your whole body. There's this woman who made this MELT technique a number of years ago, Susie Hittman, and she's kind of a pioneer in getting this into like the regular fitness circles. And she's got a whole routine where you just work with a ball on your foot and it's free. It's on YouTube. And that just opens up your shoulders. Like it's just crazy how, again, everything is connected. And, just treat your body really nice because, yeah, you need it. If you want to, you need it for everything. But if you want to make pottery too, you especially need it.
That's awesome. Well, I'm definitely gonna have you send me the link to that YouTube because my eyebrows went up
Oh,
when you said rolling a ball on your foot helps your shoulders. I'm like, I can do that. Yes, please.
well, it's not going to fix it, but it's like,
Step one, Elizabeth. Step one.
I will send that link to you. Yes, absolutely. You can feel the difference. She walks you through it in the sense of like, okay, feel how you feel now. Now we're going to roll this ball and then feel how you feel. And you can, this is that sense of, I think it's proprioception, but also that sense of awareness. Like, can you feel the difference? And it's very subtle. But once you do start learning that, then that also helps you know, you know what, my hip doesn't feel so good right now. Let me change that. Yes, I will send you the link. Yeah, and they're all free on YouTube. She also has a paid thing too, but
Because time and resources cost money. To build free content,
yeah, that's her job.
spoiler, free content's not free for someone.
Yeah. But there are a lot of people out there that provide information that's free. I also have osteoporosis, so I look up, there's a lot out there. I can't remember the name of the woman, but there's a couple YouTube channels that are out there for safe exercises for people who have osteoporosis, which is definitely something to consider. Any kind of musculoskeletal issue, it's helpful to just kind of look that up. And so even though she's not teaching videos about like how to sit the pottery wheel, she is teaching me here's what to think about when you bend and lift something, which is super helpful because we're always lifting things.
Yep. Yeah, clay
Yeah.
comes in 25-pound bags. Like,
Yeah. So someone told me the reason they do that is because it's most efficient for the producer, which makes
clearly.
sense. Yeah. It's not that easy to throw that sucker around.
Right. Exactly. I remember our old community studio when the clay delivery day would come, Meg, the woman who ran the studio, would let everybody know the day or two before to be like, hey, if you want to help unload this entire thing, you get a free bag of clay or whatever it was. And so
Oh, that's
then,
nice.
if you had 8 people unloading a pallet of clay, that's a lot easier than the one community studio organizer or the tech assistant or whoever having to repeatedly lug
Yeah.
50-pound boxes.
Yeah.
So
There's so much out there. Once you start looking, it can get very overwhelming. I did a series of posts on lifting, which I learned a lot about because a lot of it was, get up as close as you can to your whatever it is you're lifting. And if you're like, say, I'm lifting in one direction and I need to move that clay to the other side of my studio, don't turn with my torso, turn with my feet. So there are all kinds of little things. I'm like, oh my gosh, this really is better for me because it doesn't hurt my knees and it doesn't hurt my lower back. I just move my feet and hold the rest of my body steady. And then I won't be in as much pain, moving this thing to the other side. Now there's so many physical therapists and occupational therapists as well putting out information. There's also Wellness for Makers, which is Missy Graff Malone. She's going to be in this CAA session with me. She has a whole program and she provides a lot of free online content as well. And that's more, we haven't really talked about that, but that's more preventative things you can do, like stretches and ways to kind of adapt your studio, but a lot of it is like body movement. She teaches a lot about body movement techniques, which is very helpful. And there's a lot for free on her Instagram feed and online. And then she sells programs too.
Speaking of links online, we've talked about
Yeah.
the Align Potter, but just to make it super clear for everybody where they can come see all of these videos you're putting together and the resources and the posts, where should we send them on the internet?
So the website, thealignpotter.com, I believe has everything. Although I do sometimes put a few things just on the Instagram feed, which is Align Potter, at Align Potter. But there's links to the YouTube channel, links to everything on the alignpotter.com website.
Awesome. Well, I will put it in
Yeah.
the show notes so everybody can find it super fast.
I'll also say I love getting feedback and requests. I put out a poll at the end of the year, last year, and I did get some information which was helpful, but it wasn't a whole lot. So if anyone has requests, then you can contact me via Instagram or on the website too, and let me know what you'd like to see. I'd love it.
Especially if there's anybody who maybe already works at a university and we could connect you with some people and get these studies going.
That would be amazing.
Just throwing it out there,
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Awesome. Well, is there something we haven't talked about that you want to make sure people know, or I don't know, open-ended question?
Don't age. Like we learned that. Like that's step one.
Don't work past the age of 33.
Don't make pottery. Gosh, no. I'm trying to think if there's anything we haven't talked about. Hopefully, I'm getting across this idea that it's really you're just taking care of yourself. There's no right or wrong to it. There is some learning, but it's not like memorization or anything. But there is some learning to it, and it'll serve you well in the long term. I've been looking into this for about a year, and my practice is way less painful than it used to be. I still do have pain because I have lots of random issues we haven't even talked about. We have so many issues, but it's so much less painful and it's a lot more enjoyable. And I don't push myself like I used to, but I'm still as productive as I used to be. So that's been helpful.
That's very full circle because we started this with talking about being inefficient, but see, you're not.
Yeah, I did it.
I think that's the overwhelming thing I was getting even from when we first started talking was like, it doesn't have to hurt. We can find solutions because maybe that was the old school assumption was like, well, you love clay enough that you're going to have aches and pains and that's just the way it is, And it's like,
Right.
well, hold on a second.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there might have been some machismo kind of attitude to this.
No.
I know that's radical to suggest, but that doesn't really serve anybody well. And, I think John Glick might have talked about that too, how he would just work through anything, lifting a heavy wear board to get it into a giant gas kiln, but it's not necessary to do that. I am curious. I haven't looked into loading kilns and thinking about ergonomics and loading kilns. I feel like that's a tough one, the way the kilns are designed right now, but not the gas kilns with the cart, but the electric kilns are kind of.
I mean, the most obvious thing that comes to my mind, and this again goes back to my time in Chicago because Meg had to, had hip issues and had to sort that out. And part of that was having other studio members help load the kiln because if you've got a top loaded kiln,
Yeah,
that's going to hurt a lot more than, so it's one of those things to think about. I guess this is more for somebody in the position of starting to buy items for their own studio or who is ready to change kilns or something like that is thinking about the benefits of having a front loading kiln as opposed to a top loading kiln because then you're standing upright.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference. And there's electric kilns that you can still front load, but it's a budget problem.
Are there? I haven't seen any. Yeah. I mean, ideally you'd have a spring loaded kiln, but I bet the spring would probably burn out. But, so that you start and then it just gets lowers as you load more things into the kiln. So it's always up high. Okay. That's my intellectual property right there.
That sounds glorious. I'm like, all right, this is the challenge we're presenting to the businesses.
Today I've put that out.
Yep. Somebody figure that out.
10% of anything that comes.
Patent pending.
But that would be ideal, right? So then you always have it at the same height. It just lowers as you add things to it.
That sounds
That would be
awesome.
nice. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I could think of a way to do that with the bottom shelf, but I don't know how that would work after that because you'd have, once it lowers,
right?
How do you put the next, basically what we're envisioning is the stilts being springs.
No, what I'm thinking is, I mean, I guess that's true too, but,
'Cause as soon as you get
like
that bottom layer in, it's gonna
yeah,
lower, and then you have to put in the next.
right. I guess you have to figure out, like, what if you only have one heavy thing, or I'm thinking like this, so it's always the bottom's always at the top, the
Right.
bottom sole's always at the top. It depends on the weight, but you just have to we're gonna work this out. Rebecca, we're gonna retire on this. This is gonna be awesome. You work out the weight, and then you make sure you have, like, I don't know, 10 pounds or something, and that automatically lowers a certain amount, and then you put your stilts in the next shelf, and you have a formula figured out for how much
Uh-huh.
weight you need then to get it, and maybe you don't even have to get it all the way to the bottom to fire, but if you wanna fill the whole kiln, then you figure out your weight limits. My god, we're so gonna do
Alright.
this, and that's
Alright.
so much
I'm gonna
money.
cut this from the recording so nobody can steal our brilliant idea.
Oh my god, spring-loaded kiln. But, that won't that spring, like, burn? Like, how would that work? I don't know how that works.
I mean, we could figure that I feel like is the least difficult part of figuring it out.
Oh.
If we can have elements and all of the other things that are in a kiln that don't burn
Yeah, that's
out,
right.
that's just a matter of materials.
Oh my god.
We might have to cut this 3 ways. We might need to bring in another person, like an
Somebody who
engineer.
knows how to do stuff. Like
I feel like our retirement just got pushed off by about 10 years. That would be
It's a good one, though.
that would be
Well,
brilliant, but something tells me someone's gonna be like, "Yeah, just get a front loading kiln."
yeah. But even still, like, isn't that front-loading kiln on the ground? Like, don't you still have to, like, kneel to, like, get all the
The ones I guess what I'm picturing are gas kilns, but they're all high. They're all
yeah. Oh,
actually,
yeah.
no, I know Sandy's electric kiln in Australia was front loading, but they're not on the ground, they're on, like, legs.
But this would be better because then it's always, like, you're never having to lean over or, like, everything's always one height. And then when you unload it, how great would that be?
If it pulls
Like,
up to you,
I know, and then we have, like, music going, "Ta-da!"
the little, like, confetti comes out with
Yeah,
it
exactly.
as it rises up from the
Yeah, and it's like little affirmations like, "You're amazing. Look at what you made."
Good job.
Done.
That'll be the upgraded version. That'll be the
Yeah.
2.0, like having a
Yeah,
touch
yeah,
screen. That's the
right. Yeah.
we've gone down a rabbit hole.
You're perfect. This is perfect. No one else
Oh,
has ever thought about this. That's what it's gonna say. What an amazing
right.
pop. Yeah. Okay. Alright, noted. Got it right
Spring
there.
loaded. I like it.
Yeah.
Spring loaded, but gentle spring also. Because I'm picturing
Yeah.
like the iterations of trying to figure this out and pots just flying off of a like a Jack in the Box.
I guess that's where you need a physicist. Yeah, something like that. But they can do it. I mean,
We have computers in our pockets. We can figure this out.
yes, no kidding. This is more necessary anyway than a stupid phone.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. I could keep going down the rabbit hole on this, and I realize I have kept you way longer than planned. So
No, you're good. I had you down for 90 minutes, so this is all
perfect.
fine. Yep.
Nailed it.
That was a quick flip on your part. Love it.
Welcome to my brain. It's a scary place. I realize we've told everybody where to find the Aligned Potter and whatnot, but also is there a place online where you want to, so people can actually see the pots that you're making and connect with you? And
Sure. So I make pottery under the name C-Suite Ceramics, as in like the C-Suite, like a CEO, CFO. So it's just Instagram C-Suite Ceramics. If you look me up, I'm in there.
cool, perfect. You can also come hang out with you in the community because we've got all sorts of. That's where the strong arm conversation is alive and well.
Yeah. Yeah, that community is great.
Yay! Now, if a spring-loaded kiln comes onto the market, I'm going to have some words for an equipment supplier unless they contact Elizabeth and I first. You heard it here first, folks, all right? But in all seriousness, I'm curious. No matter how outlandish, what kind of equipment would you love to have help keep your body healthy and comfortable while you're making? Or better yet, what do you already do in your own making practice to help your body? I would love to hear about your own ergonomic hacks and body-saving strategies. So take a screenshot of this episode and share it on whatever social media platform you're using these days. Include your own favorite ergonomic hack and then tag me at The Maker's Playbook and Elizabeth at The Aligned Potter so we can compile all of your suggestions together to share with other makers. Whether it's a DIY standing wheel setup like I first started with, or a special stool or a simple stretching routine that keeps your making pain-free. Your idea might be exactly what another maker needs to hear. And if you're taking a social media break right now, don't worry, you can always send me your suggestions directly by clicking the Send Us a Text link right at the top of the show notes of this very episode. I'll share any suggestions you send in on a future episode here on the podcast. Of course, if you'd like to continue this conversation directly with Elizabeth, come join her inside of the community. We have multiple members who have started using the strong arm for their own body's needs, as well as trimming tools that have larger grips on them, and so many other conversations that are going on. Our community is full of folks sharing their experience and own unique solutions. As always, you can learn more about becoming part of this supportive virtual neighborhood and supporting the creation of this very podcast in the process by visiting makersplaybook.com/community. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.